Act 3, Scene 2 of No Thoroughfare. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alan Chant. No Thoroughfare by Charles Dickens. Act 3, Scene 2, On the Mountain. The road was fair enough for stout walkers, and the air grew lighter and easier to breathe as the two ascended. But the settled gloom remained as it had remained for days back. Nature seemed to have come to a pause. The sense of hearing, no less than the sense of sight, was troubled by having to wait so long for the change, whatever it might be, that impended. The silence was as palpable and heavy as the lowering clouds, or rather cloud, for there seemed to be but one in all the sky, and that one covering the whole of it. Although the light was thus dismally shrouded, the prospect was not obscured. Down in the valley of the Rhone behind them, the stream could be traced through all its many windings, oppressively sombre and solemn in its one leaden hue, a colourless waste. Far and high above them, glaciers and suspended avalanches overhung the spots where they must pass by and by. Deep and dark below them, on their right, were awful precipice and roaring torrent. Tremendous mountains arose in every vista. The gigantic landscape, uncheered by a touch of changing light or a solitary ray of sun, was yet terribly distinct in its ferocity. The hearts of two lonely men might shrink a little, if they had to win their way for miles and hours among a legion of silent and motionless men, mere men like themselves, all looking at them with fixed and frowning front. But how much more when the legion is of Nature's mightiest works, and the frown may turn to fury in an instant. As they ascended, the road became gradually more rugged and difficult. But the spirits of Vendale rose as they mounted higher, leaving so much more of the road behind them conquered. Obenreizer spoke little, and held on with a determined purpose. Both in respect of agility and endurance were well qualified for the expedition. Whatever the born mountaineer read in the weather tokens that was illegible to the other, he kept to himself. "Shall we get across to day?" asked Vendale. "No," replied the other. "You see how much deeper the snow lies here than it lay half a league lower. The higher we mount, the deeper the snow will lie. Walking is half wading even now, and the days are so short. If we get as high as the 5th Refuge, and lie to-night at the Hospice, we shall do well." "Is there no danger of the weather rising in the night," asked Vendale anxiously, "and snowing us up?" "There is danger enough about us," said Obenreizer, with a cautious glance onward and upward, "to render silence our best policy. You have heard of the Bridge of the Ganther?" "I have crossed it once." "In the summer?" "Yes, in the travelling season." "Yes, but it is another thing at this season." With a sneer, as though he were out of temper. "This is not a time of year, or a state of things on an Alpine pass, that you gentlemen holiday travellers know much about." "You are my guide," said Vendale, good humouredly. "I trust to you." "I am your guide," said Obenreizer, "and I will guide you to your journey's end. There is the bridge before us." They had made a turn into a desolate and dismal ravine, where the snow lay deep below them, deep above them, deep on every side. While speaking, Obenreizer stood pointing at the bridge, and observing Vendale's face with a very singular expression on his own. "If I, as guide, had sent you over there in advance, and encouraged you to give a shout or two, You might have brought down upon yourself tons and tons and tons of snow. That would not only have struck you dead, but buried you deep at a blow." "No doubt," said Vendale. "No doubt. But that is not what I have to do as guide. So pass silently, or going as we go, our indiscretion might else crush and bury me. Let us go on." There was a great accumulation of snow on the bridge, and such enormous accumulations of snow overhung them from protecting masses of rock, that they might have been making their way through a stormy sky of white clouds. Using his staff skilfully, sounding as he went, and looking upward with bent shoulders, as it were to resist the mere idea of a fall from above, Obenreizer softly led. Vendale closely followed. They were yet in the midst of their dangerous way, when there came a mighty rush, followed by a sound as of thunder. Obenreizer clapped his hand on Vendale's mouth, and pointed to the track behind them. Its aspect had been wholly changed in a moment. An avalanche had swept over it, and plunged into the torrent at the bottom of the gulf below. Their appearance at the solitary inn, not far beyond the terrible bridge, elicited many expressions of astonishment from the people shut up in the house. "We stay but to rest," said Obenreizer, shaking the snow from his dress at the fire. "This gentleman has very pressing occasion to get across. Tell them, Vendale." "Assuredly, I have very pressing occasion. I must cross." "You hear, all of you. My friend has very pressing occasion to get across, and we want no advice and no help. I am as good a guide, my fellow countrymen, as any of you. Now give us to eat and drink." In exactly the same way, and in nearly the same words, when it was coming on dark, and they had struggled through the greatly increased difficulties of the road, and had at last reached their destination for the night, Obenreizer said to the astonished people at the Hospice, gathering about them at the fire, while they were yet in the act of getting their wet clothes off, and shaking the snow from their clothes: "It is well to understand one another, friends all. This gentleman has," said Vendale, readily taking him up with a smile, "very pressing occasion to get across. Must cross. You hear? He has very pressing occasion to get across. Must cross. We want no advice and no help. I am mountain born, and act as guide. Do not worry us by talking about it, but let us have supper, and wine, and bed." All through the intense cold of the night, the same awful stillness. Again, at sunrise, no sunny tinge to gild or redden the snow. The same impenetrable waste of deathly white, the same immovable air, the same monotonous gloom in the sky. "Travellers!" A friendly voice called to them from the door, after they were afoot, knapsack on back, and staff in hand, as yesterday. "Recollect! There are 5 places of shelter, near together, on the dangerous road before you; and there is the wooden cross, and there is the next Hospice. Do not stray from the track. If the tourment comes on, take shelter instantly." "The trade of these poor devils!" said Obenreizer to his friend, with a contemptuous backward wave of his hand towards the voice. "How they stick to their trade! You Englishmen say we Swiss are mercenary. Truly it does look like it." They had divided between the 2 knapsacks such refreshments as they had been able to obtain that morning, and as they deemed it prudent to take. Obenreizer carried the wine as his share of the burden; Vendale the bread and meat and cheese, and the flask of brandy. They had for some time laboured upward and onward through the snow, which was now above their knees in the track, and of unknown depth elsewhere; and they were still labouring upward and onward through the most frightful part of that tremendous desolation, when snow began to fall. At first but